Welcome to the Minds Capital Podcast, the show devoted to the growing world of independent sponsors and entrepreneurial private equity. I'm Will Smith, here with my partners in Minds Capital, Max Lummis and Nicholas James. Today's conversation is with Chris Eichmann and Edwin Burke of Pillsman Partners. Nicholas, what was a takeaway you had from our conversation with Edwin and Chris?
Edwin had a hot take. He said that we are not operators. And usually you hear independent sponsors say the opposite. They will say we're so operationally hands-on, we're so involved. And so I thought this was, first of all, a little differentiated. But secondly, I actually think it's more honest. And the reason Edwin says it, I believe, is because when they started out, they decided whether to be a searcher or an independent sponsor. Searchers, I think we all agree, are more operational. They go into the company, take a W-2 salary, and are by default the operator. Sponsors are not. However, I think erroneously, a lot of sponsors come from private equity funds and contrast themselves to that, in which case they probably are more operational and hands-on than the average large cap fund out there is. So it's all, of course, a scale and a spectrum. But I thought it was interesting how Edwin's position is that we are not the operator. And he extended this by saying, if we bring an operating partner into the mix, it feels like to the management team and the founder that we are bringing in consultants. And small business owners don't like or trust consultants. So instead of bringing in consultants, they embrace the fact that, no, we want to partner with the founder and the management team and give our trust to them. And this is a partnership and a collaboration. And then he calls it that they are the bridge between that said management team and the capital. And that, to me, nicely describes what an independent sponsor typically is. Yes, more operationally heavy than large cap private equity, but not actually operators. They are kind of in that strategic layer in between, and that is the role and value add of most independent sponsors. So to me, that was kind of a standout moment because I hadn't heard it articulated quite as crisply as that, or the usage of the word bridge before.
Well, it's also interesting because you wonder why private equity independent sponsors are so eager to say they're operators. If owners in the lower middle market, management in the lower middle market, at least in Edwin and Chris's experience, don't even react well to that message. Because your point there, Nicholas, is that a lot of private equity groups, independent sponsors say it and then don't deliver on it. Well, why even say it if nobody really wants you to be operating anyway and they want you to act as a bridge? But I thought that choice of word was also, I perked up at that first time I'd heard that, and I thought it was a great captured positively what they do without trying to overpromise or claim that they're somehow operationally involved. My favorite piece of the interview was toward the end, where we get into a little bit of the behind the scenes on independent sponsor marketing, publicity, appearing on podcasts, and why they chose to come on the Minds Capital podcast, which was a decision for them. They were not a default yes. And we encounter this a lot, certainly a lot more than on my other podcast, the Acquiring Minds podcast, where there are a lot of eager guests. Here, we do bump up against independent sponsors who are much more calculating in the pros and cons of a public stage. So interesting to put them on the spot and ask them for their logic there. Max, any takeaways from our conversation with Chris and Edwin?
Yeah, Nicholas, I like what you have to say about them not being operators. And I think there's at least two schools of thought here. And I'm not sure one's right and the other's wrong. I think there's different situations that call for different sponsors, because we certainly see deals that often are very successful where the sponsor is bringing in a very strong, seasoned operating partner that maybe they have a deep connection into the industry, and they immediately are bringing sales relationships and recruiting opportunities to the new, to the company. So that's exciting when we see a good fit between a sponsor that is very operationally focused with a very well-aligned operating partner. But this is a different situation, which also makes complete sense to me, where these guys are looking for businesses that already have a really strong management team And they're just trying to amplify those abilities and help where they can, but not get in the way. And they go so far as to even talk about the fact that they found the ultimate CEO of the entire portfolio company based on one of their acquisitions. So they're finding talent and making acquisitions, and really they're seeking out talent when they're making acquisitions. So I think that's just a different or a differentiated strategy. And I think either can be successful if implemented in the right situation. The other thing I really like to hear about is their horizontal integration strategy, where they're buying up horizontally accretive assets and then offering new products across the whole portfolio and building really a flywheel effect where they're able to, get better utilization on their assets, sell existing services into the horizontal businesses, and then bring the new services that they're acquiring in these horizontal acquisitions across the existing customer base. It was good to hear how they've implemented that strategy and how successful they've been with it.
Agreed. Before we get to the interview, a reminder that at Minds Capital, we invest equity into independent sponsor-led acquisitions. Our check size is $1 to $3 million per investment. We average a commitment a month. So if you're a sponsor raising for a platform acquisition, please submit your deal to us at mindscapital.co. Or if you're interested in investing in Minds Capital as an LP, there's a pre-registration form on our website for accredited investors. So you can fill that out to be kept in the loop on future raises. Also on our website, mindscapital.co. Okay, here is the Minds Capital podcast interview with Edwin Burke and Chris Eichmann of Pillsman Partners. Enjoy. Welcome to the Minds Capital Podcast, your connection to the growing world of independent sponsors and entrepreneurial private equity. We are your hosts, Will Smith and Nicholas James. Edwin Burke and Chris Eichmann are the founders of Pillsman Partners, an independent sponsor focused on industrials, manufacturing, and infrastructure. They bring combined experience in banking, PE, and operations to their 14-year-old partnership. Between suits and jeans is something of a firm philosophy. Since 2012, they've completed 7 platform investments, plus 23 add-ons. And in one of their more recent deals, 2019, PowerVac, they've completed 11 add-on acquisitions and delivered on cultural alignment and rollover equity opportunities for their sellers. Chris, Edwin, welcome to the Minds Capital Podcast.
Thanks for having us. Thank you very much.
Guys, let's begin just for more context by going through these 14 years. And if you need to even talk about how you came to form Pillsman Partners, feel free. But let's try to condense the firm's history, if you could.
Sure, I'll start. So Chris and I met back in 2002 in graduate school. So we got to be close friends. We were in the same cluster and really had the same sort of background in terms of sort of investment banking. Chris was on the credit side. I was more on the M&A side. And we had done some entrepreneurial type endeavors and also had some private equity experience. Myself, a little bit more on the venture capital side of things.
It all got started. We were having a conversation in Edwin's kitchen when it all came together, and he suggested that we get business cards. I had sat next to a senior partner at a law firm at one of those LBO conferences, and I was just there listening to everybody, chatting with him, and he started talking about pledge funds. And soon we got into talking about pledge funds, and then that turned into a conversation about search funds. We started doing research around the search fund model, and started kind of connecting all of the dots, and from our experience, both in single asset bets, if you will, whether it be on the VC side, the startup side, or in pursuing management buyouts of the companies that you're working at. We realized that we didn't want to put all our eggs in one basket, and at the same time we didn't want to fund. So this was still kind of at the beginning of the not so funded sponsor model, which has evolved to where we are today, of course. In any event, we sat there in his kitchen, and we had our kind of complementary investment philosophies in the industries that we had been interested over time, and they complemented each other and kind of resonated with us. So that's when we put together our first investment strategy, which was really focused on those types of businesses that we had gotten to know: specialty chemicals, advanced materials, engineered industrial products, and those types of services. Over time, that is very much evolved, which is reflected in kind of our refresh. And the refresh is really kind of informed by the experience of those 14 years and those 7 platforms, and working with all types of capital partners, from family offices to SBICs to mezz funds to traditional private equity funds. It's been a good kind of blend from there.
Many independent sponsors eventually consider, if not at the outset, plan to eventually raise a fund. And you all, after 14 years, have decided against that because you probably could have with your track record some years ago. What is that decision or decision against all about?
Well, I think, a lot of independent sponsors, they use it as a stepping stone, to go create a track record, go out there and, prove that they can be a funded sponsor. We took a different approach, and that really wasn't an ambition of ours. What we really liked was having a very lean institution. We wanted to have deep control of it, and we wanted to sort of apply, what we have learned over the years to sort of the founder industry. So it was really focused on founder-owned businesses. We wanted a concentrated portfolio. We'd worked on the other side of the table.
Just to add to that, a lot of it was, we had both worked at bigger firms, institutional firms. We had both been through, seen or been part of fundraising cycles. We had both sat in portfolio management meetings and things like that, and all of that stuff is critical to, investment management and managing these types of assets for sure. But what, really got us going each day and what kind of most interests us are these businesses, on an individual basis, the management teams, the always amazing origin stories, the people, the characters, just the wide range of experience that you have, in this market, in this lower middle market. It's you start managing a fund, and it's no secret, your life changes. You become a firm manager, you become an asset manager. You can still be an investment manager and a discrete investment manager. That is certainly possible. But then when you start having to think about in almost day-to-day processes, even investment selection, things like people's career, supporting the admin staff or what have you in a committed fund and that kind of thing. For us, it was a distraction. So now we just distract ourselves in other ways, like finding new platforms and add-ons and new investors and all of that. Just different distractions.
Edwin, you called it a stepping stone for many independent sponsors to do the deal-by-deal structure initially before raising a fund. In your opinion, what steps do you need to complete as an independent sponsor before you are ready for a fund? How many deals? What kind of track record do you need to show? How many years will that take if that's the path you decide to take?
Yeah, well, I've known many that have done it. I would say a lot of them spin out of larger firms. I think there's a succession in terms of levels at private equity firms. A lot of vice presidents today and 10 years ago thought that there wasn't sort of the upward, sort of momentum, and felt like there was a sort of a ceiling there. So we've seen many of those break out. I would say most of them have done about 2 deals. These are people that have, big brands behind them. which can also be a detriment, right? Because all the deals, come rolling in. They got large support staffs, and there's a lot of things that are, I guess, more. You got to get out there and do it yourself, right? Or identify new relationships in order to get it done. So yeah, I think two is sort of a common deal, but leveraging off that prior experience and brand in order to launch themselves into a small committed fund.
And do they have to show performance of these deals, or can you close 2 deals within 18 months and then say, we have been able to deploy capital, find deals that fit our target, now we're ready to raise a fund?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely not exits. I would say they're developed in terms of a narrative, in terms of getting through a number of milestones in order to prove proper execution. And also, having those deals be in industries with concrete investment theses, where they can explain how they're going to, translate that into broader investments, often with larger checks, and, have an M&A strategy if it hadn't already been exhibited.
Chris, you had mentioned how independent sponsors are directed towards single asset bets. But this is something you have to counterbalance against having all eggs in one basket. So how do you think about that? And for you guys who never set out to do a stepping stone towards a fund, how have you thought about that? The single asset bets dynamic of being an independent sponsor?
Yeah, well, I think just to frame that the way I intended, that was in the context of searchers and kind of the search fund model as we were researching it back then, and that was very much sort of the tried and true: go find the company, go run it, go live it. And Edwin and I had both done that before, and that's a different kind of engagement. We were looking, while we didn't want a huge portfolio, we wanted to have the opportunity to make investments, and grow value on different platforms, really.
Yeah, I actually think the independent sponsor model is the best of both worlds there, right? Because you are actually taking single asset bets, but you're not taking only a single one. You're making multiple such bets within a portfolio over a 5 or 14-year period like you are. So yeah, I like how you summarize that.
The whole notion of carry, right? And how funds can have very convoluted waterfalls. Everything is pooled. There's clawbacks, things get complicated. And, when you're building a firm, that again just adds to the considerations that aren't focused on the actual thing of investing.
Just one quick terminology question. You used the term pledge fund earlier in the conversation. What is a pledge fund?
I think there's a number of approaches to it, but fundamentally it's kind of like a committed fund without the commitment, and it's also friends and family kind of passing the hat, where you have kind of soft obligations of, call it $20 million of equity capital, and then it's to some extent like a grown-up search fund or a grown-up searcher model.
Guys, having been in this for 14 years, and this idea that many independent sponsors, or some, are independent sponsors as a stepping stone to becoming a fund, do you feel like that playbook has evolved? A bit of a leading question. Where I'm really going is it seems like the independent sponsor model merits the very things that make it appealing that we're talking about right now are becoming clearer and clearer, and I think it's being more recently into the space. From what I gather, it seems like many people become sponsors today with a commitment to the model, maybe much more so than they did 10 and 12 years ago, where it was still suffering under the brand of Fundless sponsor, and it was the redheaded stepchild, and everyone was just trying to pass through it as quickly as possible. Whereas today, it's an end in its own right, it seems. Do you feel like that captures it?
Well, I mean, I guess we started out going to the Capital Roundtable conferences, the iGlobal conferences. I mean, those were excellent in terms of figuring out who else was out there doing similar things and how did they compare to us, right? I guess there's a few buckets of types of personalities. A lot of them are operational experience. So they're coming at it from, usually with some sort of deep technical expertise, whether it be in an engineered product, you see, people that are coming out of distress situations, focused on turnarounds. You see people that are focused very specifically on an industry such as education, right?
Yeah.
We always wanted to be a generalist. I think people that are spinning out of the large firms are also generalists just by their experience and background. But yeah, I would agree with that. I think you always have the people that are coming in to sort of check out what's going on. They have the passion, they have the ambition to get into the space, but they don't have any contacts and they don't, they probably don't have some of the skills that are necessary in terms of, finding the right capital providers, figuring out how to get debt, for the deal. If there's sort of operational or river guide that are necessary. There's a lot of sort of pieces to put together, and you can do that, I guess, mostly through networking. But having prior experience in at least some of those things, I think, is what ties together the people that are really wed to the industry and sort of have a vision of becoming someone that does this on the long term and for many platform acquisitions.
And so, Edwin, say more about what you think a good, solid skill set to be successful as a sponsor today looks like.
Well, I think you have to, understand things from different perspectives. When Chris and I were doing investment banking, I think you really focus on sort of, being creative and structuring. Right. On the debt and equity side, you sort of get a sense of the lender's psychology, right? How do they think, which is very different than how equity investors think. And I think you also think about risk mitigation quite a bit. You always think about what could go wrong and how to communicate that to investors. In traditional PE, I think you sort of move into, sort of underwriting vigor and how you govern, right? Companies and how you manage a portfolio, right? So you've got asset allocation considerations, operating experience. You learn about the culture. So I don't think you need all of these, but I think you need a subsegment of it, depending on if you want to have a very focused investment, which would sort of lead you closer down the avenue of a single bucket investment, and then to do maybe some follow-ons in adjacent segments. So that's some
Great.
general ideas. Yeah,
great. On the point about operations, guys, I referenced your between suits and jeans kind of tongue-in-cheek language. Many firms, many sponsors will talk about being operationally involved, rolling up their sleeves. I get the impression that you guys are put your money where your mouth, or you're serious when you say that. You were considering a search fund. You decided against it ultimately, but that is many sponsors don't even consider that path because they don't want to be operators, which of course is what a search fund, you end up being the CEO. Mm-hmm. So just say a little bit more about your participation in, or even philosophical approach to operations.
Well, I think the first thing we tell operators is that we are not operators, right? I think we want to make it very clear. But we do.
Should I scratch the question?
No, not at all.
It's a question of relating to the operations more than actually doing the operation.
Yeah. Well, it's all a frame of reference, right? If you're, out there hauling waste and, you're dealing with municipalities, we don't have any of that experience, right? We're not going to be day one any real real value add. But we do understand is sort of, dealing with those types of customers, having those types of employees. And we understand what sort of differentiates one company within the industry in which we're looking at closely from others. So, I think what we try and do is spend a lot of time and learn how the founder thinks. What sort of restraints, have they felt over time? Oftentimes it's capital. A lot of times it's people. A lot of times they've thought about M&A and never really had the, we're a little bit too scared to do it, right? You're sort of going out the risk curve, and without that experience, it's quite scary. So, I think what we do is we try and create the bridge between our capital partners who, have these broad portfolios. They're on many, many boards. They're traveling around. They have to spend a lot of time raising money for different funds. So, we have more time, and, I think we sit in between and, facilitate that communication, but also we make things happen quicker, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
How do they react when you say that we are not operators, we are the bridge? And I'm asking because so many people will use we are hands-on and operational. And I know you're hands-on, but they will use that operator as kind of the leading entry into a conversation to relate to a business owner. But you're rather taking the course of, let's be honest, and show them we need to partner and we bring a complementary skill set.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering how that dynamic goes down in an actual conversation.
Yeah,
I would.
Let me add to that in that it's also, we're going in, we're saying we're not the operator and we don't want to operate your business. We want to help you operate it better for sure and grow it for sure. But, in independent sponsor land, it's even a more interesting conversation because it's not even our money, really, the bulk of it, at least, right? We're going out and raising it from our partners. So, the way we look at it, it's, we have to sell even a more compelling investment thesis to the seller and to the management team, right? As well as to our investors. So, bringing those two kind of stories together. And also, we talked about kind of resources and capabilities of what makes it a successful independent sponsor. I think a lot of it is being able to communicate well and kind of the critical pieces along whatever growth trajectory you're on to all of the various constituencies. And, we're not in the operations, but, we're helping, craft ways to recruit talent, retain talent, build boards of directors, really build out the C-suite, and do that in a way that is culturally, reinforcing within the organization and building off of that. And, so I suppose that's where it dips down into the operations, but it's more of a complement and not in the operations.
And what about on the capital side? How do you what's the narrative there when you say that we are the bridge and not the operator per se?
Well, I think a big piece of it too, Edwin alluded to it in terms of who our partners have been. They tend to be more thinly staffed, mezz or equity firms. But we also, a lot of our time, most of our time, other than those sort of operational things, is very much, building the add-on pipeline and working on the M&A strategy. That's kind of inherent in all of our investment theses, except it's not, it's not baked into any valuation or any upfront work. It's at the front of our mind. Yes. Are we underwriting to that? Absolutely not. It's an organic, very much an organic growth case, that on its own stands up in any credit committee, right? In as a standalone financing.
And I would add on the operations side, Pillsman started out with an operating partner model. So we had, 8 to 10, Chris, people that we knew from industry, people we networked with to bring in industries that we were focused upon. And, we brought them to introduce them to management teams. And I would say it was kind of a sticky situation. I think people felt like, the consultants were arriving. And, they had certain views, that I think were very important to them. Obviously, they they wanted to listen and learn more about how to grow the company and what opportunities existed, but they didn't want to hear that everything was going to be overhauled, right? And that you had to answer to someone, what is their title? What role do they play on the team? And what is really the hierarchy here? So, I think we pulled back on that model. I don't know, Chris, we did that for maybe 2 years, right?
Now, was that deliberate or something that you now reflect on was a better fit with our model?
Well, we thought it would differentiate us, right? I mean, as an initial independent sponsor 14 years ago, you were differentiated by capital more than anything else, right?
Mhm.
You had to convince people that they could trust you with the capital. You could, negotiate a good deal, at a good valuation, and that you could be a good steward for the investment. But another way to stand out, we thought, and we were looking at somewhat more technical industries, I guess was another way we were trying to stand out. So we thought that, it would be very fitting to bring in an operating partner team, but also, not be an operating focused firm, if that makes sense. Have that on sort of the sideline as support and, help the investment be more successful than it otherwise be. But it really ended up spooking the management teams and, making them feel uncomfortable.
Did you complete any deals with an operating partner, and how did the dynamics then evolve from those pre-closing meetings where it was a little bit tentative towards later in the investment cycle there?
Yeah, we got to a closed acquisition with an operating partner alongside us. The management team became a little bit more straightforward and honest once the deal was closed, that they did not think they were sort of a productive part of the team, and that they would request that operating partner move on.
Oh, okay. So you were able to kind of detach yourself from an operating partner after a deal closed. Was that complicated or hairy legally? Did he or she have a share in the economics, or was it a pure 1099 that you could cut loose?
Well, we left that until, after the deal was closed in order to figure out what exactly
see.
the role and time commitment and, what specific projects, right? We always thought it in terms of what projects was this operating partner going to be responsible for and drive forward, because they're not the CEO of the business, right? At least not in the way that we put this together. So, I think it was constructive. I think they understood if they were not going to be part of the team in the way that they had envisioned and that we had envisioned alongside them, then, it's a little bit difficult to move forward without the support of the management team itself. And now you're messing with the culture of the business and you're going off into sort of dangerous territory.
And your takeaway from that experience was you thought that this was sort of a generalized finding, that in general the operating partner model wasn't going to be something you pursue in any of your acquisitions. This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't call it a hard and fast rule. I would say the cases are, at least for the types of businesses and opportunities that we get most excited by, it's not critical. It's not to say where there is as Edwin was describing, the more complex businesses that we were going after, where that could be helpful. And, are those resources that we draw from, where down the road, if it made, a lot of sense, sure. I just think finding those cases is more difficult than say an operating partner finding and sourcing an opportunity and then coming to an independent sponsor and saying, hey, let's figure this out. I think what we found is, and again, this is just a generalization and kind of the folks that we've worked with, the sort of the nature of deal making and value creation, of buying right and, not ruining what's good, sometimes gets lost because an operating partner wants to operate, right? They want to have their imprint. Some, at least. There are others that, are good at keeping, getting things back on track. If it's kind of a semi turnaround situation, sure, that's a different circumstance and also a different kind of operating partner. There are those that, have very nuanced understanding of, sub-segments and markets of specialty chemicals, right? All of those are valuable conversations, but to then go and kind of stake our firm's investment strategy on those types of opportunities is just difficult, right? Who's paying for plane tickets? How is that getting funded?
I would add, we really want to invest in the management team that exists. And I think in a lot of cases, when you have an operating partner, there's a little bit of the feeling that you have to force them into things, maybe.
Yeah.
And I guess we feel like we want the management team to be as robust, as it can be and standalone, because that's what we're putting money behind, and that's what we need to have confidence in, and then you build from that structure upwards, right? I think adding an operating partner sometimes, it's just another individual in the process. You've got your equity providers, your debt providers, in our case, an independent sponsor. We're bringing in often cases, new accountants, marketing, outsourced marketing, expertise. It's a little bit intimidating to a company that's, been around 50 years and has done things certain ways. I think it's exciting, but it's also very scary. And if you can just reduce a little bit of the complexity of it, I think it's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
With all of this, we have the initial step in at least two investments was to find a new CEO. One was, I think it was a conditions precedent that we have found a new CEO to run the business. So that exists. We've also, been in very close agreement with the seller and founder that, that search was, a priority one, which I guess to some degree is like an operating partner. Our operating partner just happens to have owned and run the business.
When everyone says the same thing, it at least piques my interest to look in the other direction. And it's very easy for an independent sponsor to say we are lean heavily into ops and we have operating partners and we bring a lot of skills and credibility on that front. And by the way, I know you guys do, having been so seasoned in operations and businesses. But also, I think the argument I'm hearing here is very self-aware, where many take the position, the easy thing to say, what everyone wants to hear both on the capital side and business owner side is someone who is deep in the operations. What you guys are saying is that no, our capital providers are lean and want access to this asset class, and they want to work with someone who is positioned to partner with management teams. And then you're extending that and saying, we partner with management teams not by alienating them with our know-how, but by disarming them, by immediately entering the discussion and saying, we want to partner with you and back you and support you, and our capital partners are here to do that. And I actually really like this approach of saying we are the bridge. That was the key word you used there, between capital sources who seek high growth, this high growth asset class, and management teams who specifically are looking for partners and augmentation to what they're doing, but are unsure about how to approach M&A or capital markets or whatever it would be.
Nicholas, it's actually a really nice description, and I haven't heard us described in that manner, but I think you actually hit a lot of good points on it, because we're not trying to go in and pretend like we know everything by any means. If anything, hopefully we're just asking slightly better questions earlier on in a process, so that somehow we've demonstrated a slightly better understanding of a hopefully more complex business, and whether that be, an engineering process or a set of processes or some kind of industrial component that's super obscure, that takes a lot of time to sort of understand initially, and then also to then spend the time to understand how that business and market can be grown. right? And sometimes that just takes a little more time and stepping immediately into operations.
And do you think that's reflected in the businesses that you have owned, that they have more complexity to them, not situationally, but product-wise and supply chain-wise and value chain?
Yeah, I would say they definitely do. I think you can define a moat, right, many different ways. Moats are, in a certain sense, why can't you be displaced, right? You're embedded within the customer's operations, embedded within the supply chain. You're irreplaceable, right? And sometimes that's done technically, whether it's through spec or regulations and compliance. So, it's really, I think oftentimes there is a technical aspect to having, a defensible business with margins, above 20%, which is what we look for. I think it's not a prerequisite for acquisitions, but yeah, I think it's often a common attribute of things we're looking at. It also gives us a little bit of an edge. There's less people that are going to bid on the asset. I think just by definition, there is more ways that you can take that strength and accentuate it, right, even further. Probably through M&A would be a common avenue of doing that.
Guys, we only have you for a few more minutes, but wanted to dive a little deeper into the aforementioned PowerVac deal.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us the kind of the top level bullet points, and we'll get into it in some more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. So PowerVac's an acquisition we did back in 2019. So I guess we're in year 6. And, at the time, I think the best way to describe the business is sort of above ground and underground. So they do facility and commercial services, plumbing, grease trap cleaning, HVAC, mechanical service. And then they do a lot of underground sort of infrastructure. So they've got jet vac machines cleaning the sewer and stormwater drains. Then they have hydrovac excavation, which is often working with the utility companies, digging holes to put utility poles in for sort of uncovering utilities, right? To work on them in sort of an environmentally friendly, fast, efficient, cost-effective way. And then there's a sort of CCTV inspection where you're putting robots down sewer infrastructure to see what sort of decay has occurred over the years. You've got a lot of aging infrastructure, especially around the Midwest. That was part of our investment thesis going in. So that was PowerVac when we made the investment in 2019. The customer base is really municipalities, utilities, industrial and commercial facilities. And we really gave a lot of credit to the founder who had this vision of a sort of a one work order, right? So his experience came from working in, chemical plants, and he was the guy that was in charge of, cleaning the tanks, or at least, supervising, figuring out who was going to come in and clean the tanks and make sure they were compliant for OSHA reasons, taking the waste and making sure it was disposed of efficiently. So, he became fascinated with sort of this exterior part of his job, and went out and started to do it himself.
It was Michigan based, right? You mentioned the Midwest.
Yeah.
It's Michigan based. Yeah.
Yeah. Just outside of Detroit. So, we started really in central Michigan, and that's where it had always been based. And, the founder, as Edwin was describing, he was looking he was contracting all these various folks, plumbing, electrical, when he had to clean a machine, move a machine, what have you, clean out a drain. And he kind of said to himself, I wish I could just have, my work order. If you could just have your work order, you'd be all set. So sure enough, that is in fact the website, yourworkorder.com. It's not PowerVac. So people always kind of struggle finding it, which I think has been a good thing for the most part. So when we started there, he had also, he's a very smart guy. He had also done a handful, I think maybe 7 or 8 very small acquisitions in the 23 years that preceded our involvement with him. So it was very much in his DNA of, finding these small grease trap cleaning businesses, plumbers, specialty electricians that would go into, grocery stores and things like that. And those were their core markets, schools and school plumbing and the like. So he had kind of put these together. And, at first glance, it doesn't look like there's any rhyme or reason, but then you very quickly understand what he was trying to build and how he was building it and how all of this stuff is self-reinforcing. And that really dovetailed wonderfully with building out, an acquisition strategy, both based on geographic expansion, but then the various services and kind of the subsegments of services and where they overlap again and reinforce each other. So expanding out into Western Michigan through various electrical services, an additional trenchless and pipeline work, so pipe repair work, and then up into Northern Michigan with electrical. And then out into the eastern markets, into upstate New York.
And by your work order or the one work order, what you mean is one solution provider for the many pieces of work that need to be done in some infrastructure cleaning or project.
Yeah, everyone wants one
Yes.
person to call, right? A lot of the work that PowerVac does is emergency, right, situations. You got a water line main break. You need someone to come right now, and you have to diagnose the problem, right? First, you got to get the water to stop flowing, and then you have to we can inspect that line. We can send a robot down the pipe to figure out what the issue is. We can, then bring in jetting trucks, right, and hydrovac trucks, and get that problem cleared right away. And that really leads to one, a lot of loyalty. Those customers often become permanent, recurring customers over time because we showed up there. And we also have the various services, in-house, because oftentimes jobs escalate, right, from one problem to another as you figure out what's going on. So the next time that they have a problem, you're sort of top of mind in terms of, coming to fix it.
I feel like there's a philosophical, there can be a philosophical disagreement between that strategy of kind of building out all these horizontal or adjacent services so that you can be a full stop, one-stop shop type solution versus sort of maybe a horizontal strategy you might call it, versus going really deep on the one niche that you just own and are associated with and are the best of the best. So obviously you guys have made the horizontal strategy work and you've had front row seats to seeing it work. Any thoughts on that strategy broadly or generalizable thoughts about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can do vertical integration or horizontal integration, obviously. I mean, I think what we added, but in the service model that PowerVac operates in, you've got sort of density and adjacency sort of, combined with each other. So, we added new geographies through M&A, added a larger recurring base. So we're bringing in new customers, we're bringing in new equipment, we're bringing in new personnel. We can cross-train those employees. We can, take specific expertise that they have and translate across the entire firm. So there really is sort of a flywheel that reinforces itself, expands the customer base, makes that more recurring, increases margins, and it becomes sustainable. So you don't need to continue doing M&A to maintain the same growth profile. You're actually accelerating organic growth as you do further M&A and integrate it. So, we added trenchless rehabilitation, which is a much sexier part of the business. So this is going down with robots and, doing liners. So this is old, in many cases, 100-year concrete pipe. We're going and putting epoxy liners in there. And traditional is called a CIPP process. We bought a company called Precision out in New York, who was also doing trenchless rehabilitation, but they were doing something called UV curing, which is a more advanced process. You're using sort of specific resins that react to the UV light. You can get these done a lot quicker. There's no chemical. Styrene has been a big concern in a lot of municipal neighborhoods because people complain, right? It smells, and it's the walls are much thinner and much stronger. So that was something that in the New York market was somewhat prevalent and seen as a superior way to provide the service. It was not sort of inherent within the Michigan market. So we took that, many years of expertise and technical know-how and brought that over to Michigan. And, at this point in time, we have very little competition, able to pick, a large and growing number of projects at a very high margin.
And so just, you mentioned the flywheel there, Edwin. So your argument is that the broader the service offering you can have, the more capabilities you have to offer, the more inbound you will also get because customers find you. And that, of course, generates revenue and cash, which enables you to acquire even more capabilities and skills and staff and geographies. And so this becomes a circular effect.
Yeah, I mean, if you picture the circle, it's starting out with the acquisitions or expanding your capabilities sort of across the platform, and they're bringing in new customers. Then you take those expanded capabilities and expertise, and you transfer it across the platform. These and across locations. In the case of PowerVac. That equipment scale sort of increases the utilization of the equipment. So you've got hydro trucks, vacuum trucks, trenchless trucks that were operating at maybe 80% efficiency, where you can gear that up. You can add new crews and expand the business quite rapidly. I think step four would be, cross-selling those, right? And that's really done by the people that are out in the field. We don't have a direct sales force. Those are people that become very trusted among the supervisors in which they're operating, and they're identifying ways in which they can help. And the broader you make the platform and more capabilities you add, the more that you can add to those customers. And then you really you're driving organic growth because you're sort of embedding, the customer across many different services, which sort of naturally flows through maintenance, inspection, repair, and related services. So overall, it's higher adjacency, higher utilization, and much deeper relationships with customers lead to much higher recurring revenue.
And this also provides a roadmap, I would imagine, for M&A, where instead of being opportunistic, you know specifically which capabilities or geographies that you want to buy in order to take your business to the next level.
Oh, absolutely. I think we became extremely disciplined. I think over 350 opportunities we looked at. I can't sort of say enough about the cultural fit, right? They have to have the same sort of emphasis on high quality service. They have to have the same respect for the safety, right, on the job. They have to, in our view, is very much a meritocracy. So we sort of, in many of our investments, steer away from a lot of hierarchy, have more flat institutions, and provide a lot of upward mobility opportunities. I think that's proven to be, I guess, how we like to make our imprint on the companies.
Just to add to Edwin's comment there, I mean, we've had in all of those 11 add-ons with PowerVac, I think pretty much every seller rolled over into the platform with maybe one or two exceptions. And then importantly, the now CEO and president of the entire group, we had the good fortune of connecting with through one of those acquisitions. So it's, good to see the team, the management team evolve, both from outside new folks, but then certainly, with all of those continuing with the group.
And what's the recipe for onboarding 11 different entrepreneurs, which they are, into one organization? And that's a lot of, chefs and the cooks in the kitchen, and a lot of people who are putting rollover equity in at different stages. So what's the recipe for ensuring that goes well? And I don't know if in your careers you've seen contrasts where it hasn't gone as well.
Yeah, I guess to start as kind of the foundation is really, working with a like-minded capital partner who understands, the buy and build strategy, what that entails, the kinds of upfront and transitional risk one needs to underwrite to build the initial platform. Right. And it's just a different type of business. If you're buying call it a $3 to $4 million EBITDA platform, the add-ons that make that most exciting are probably not $3 or $4 million. They're, sometimes $100,000, maybe $250. So being able to shift back and forth and understand that from a capital partner standpoint, I think is critical. And then of course there's the management side.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of upfront work in terms of feeling very confident that the founder is, he's on board for a certain number of years and he's excited about it. We have a very intentional sort of way that we come into a business. The first 45 days after we buy one, we basically don't have any disruption at all. We want to create a lot of the feeling of continuity. It's the same founder. It's the same sort of leadership. You want to protect the employment stability. You want to, come in with benefits that are even greater than their current benefit program. Everything should be seen as sort of a soft touch, where you're providing comfort and security and preserving the employee relationships, which is just an extension of preserving the customer relationships over time. So it's always there's varying degrees of success. I'd say with PowerVac, I think we're extremely lucky. I think three of those founders have sort of moved on after working with the business for 4 to 5 years, and the rest of them continue to remain with us. And I can confidently say they're likely all to have that second bite of the apple be greater than the initial sale. So it's great.
All 11?
Absolutely, all 11 of them. So
Wow.
they obviously came in at different points from 2020, I think, is when we did our first acquisition, through about 12 months ago was the last one. So yeah, I could say that everyone's.
And so are they making, do you mean that they're making more per share in the second bite of the apple, or is the actual total amount of money coming their way?
I'm talking about absolute value.
Interesting.
So,
And they've been rolling, call it 20 to 30% each then, or what's been typical?
Yeah, it's been 20 to 30%. Also participating in certain equity roles when we do subsequent acquisitions. Although most of our acquisitions have been funded through cash flow and really small amounts of additional mezzanine and senior debt.
I mean, that's an incredible return, and a lot of people talk about making second bite money. But especially for late stage add-on acquisitions, you're now saying that the money you roll will do more than 3x MOIC, right?
Well, I guess I would emphasize that some of the later acquisitions that we did were larger amounts, not because they were designed that way, but that's just how they ended up. So you can imagine.
But it's still. Yeah, and I imagine also you can bring some of these guys to your management meetings pre-closing. If you're looking for a 12th acquisition, hey, here are 11 guys you can talk to. They're all vouching for us and making a lot of money in partnership.
That's part of our playbook. Yeah, we haven't sort of opened up the lines to all of them, basically to talk to people that are considering joining the PowerVac family.
Has that ever backfired in any way?
Not that I'm aware of. It wasn't evident to me. No.
Well, guys, 6-7 years in, and 11 acquisitions, and your confidence that the second bite will be will be larger than the first for all of these sellers. What does that look like in concrete terms? Are we, or is something imminent, or what can you say, if anything?
Yeah, well, I think you can guess within the 6th year of ownership, we are, I guess in stages of, planning the exit. And I would say stay tuned, but you won't have to wait that long for more information.
Before we let you go, guys, one last little segment here. You'd mentioned a brand sort of website refresh earlier in the conversation, and that caused you to kind of think about the next chapter of the firm. What did you arrive at? What can you tell us about that process?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know what happened to us in the 4th quarter last year, but we got really reflective. And I remember Chris came to me and he said, "I've got this new friend, and he makes websites." And I'm like, "Well, that's fantastic." We designed our website back in, I think it was even 2011, Chris. So even before we
sounds about
we
right.
founded the business, we started working on the website, and we developed it. We outsourced it to India. I think we paid $500 for it. And I think the more interesting question, Will, is how did we go 14 years without updating the website? But I think I remember, Chris, you initially were you were very tied to the old logo, as was I, and it was sort of it was hard to let it go. But it was a process. We wanted to sort of modernize, the look and feel of the business. I guess for ourselves as well as external people to the site. We wanted to make it, I guess, more true to our passion for founder-owned businesses and, the kind of things they are often thinking about, being, very excited about the future, but also very uncertain. Do I just want to, diversify, my money and, retire, play golf, or do I, really want to build this business? So, I think we get very, sort of emotional about that, and wanted that much more reflected on our website rather than, having it focused to capital partners and, advisors and service providers, et cetera. So, the whole vision was, what was surprising is, a lot of things didn't change. They were just sort of reshaped into more crisp sort of communication. So our strategy is the same. I think we sort of defined how we, the industries. I'd spent 9 years in specialty chemicals and thought we were going to do a lot of specialty chemicals deals. That didn't translate that well to the independent sponsor model. So, our initial website was sort of 50% specialty chemicals focused, and then 50% what Chris had a lot of, experience doing. So, is really sort of creating an identity. I mentioned earlier that in the beginning, we felt like we were different. We were differentiated by capital, more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And now you got to sort of stand out and sort of share your identity. It is a form of marketing, but it's also a form of sort of attracting the types of people that you want to work with. And, it really reinforces, I guess, our concentrated model. We have a way of doing things. Hopefully that resonates with people and, they want to work with us.
Well, your timing for this podcast is good then. Trying to communicate with the world, and then we come knocking, giving you an opportunity to do that. It's good. Chris, you were going to say?
Yeah, well, I guess going back to the original website, and it, like every independent sponsor starting out, what you put out there, unless you're rolling out, with a portfolio company of your own from a private equity firm or something, more likely than not, you're starting with a pretty blank slate. And everything that you put on a website, other than your biography, is aspirational, right? And I remember going out. We had tens, a couple hundred investor meetings, thinking that having the capital up front before we even signed or even submitted an IOI was important. Along the way, we'd point them to our website and say, "This is what we're gonna do. This is the deck. This is what we're gonna go do." And that's a hard story initially to listen to. For I can only imagine what it's like to raise a first time fund in that manner. Whereas now it was, a refresh, but it was a refresh and, clarifying the message, and really having it be more of a reflection of what we had in fact done over the past 14 years,
Sure.
and something that would echo into the future as far as the types of opportunities we want to pursue and the types of founders and families and companies and management teams we want to work with.
Well, it's early. You launched this, I guess, in December or even later, actually, because I feel like since we've started talking, when did you launch it? The new website?
Last week.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Because when I went to it today, I heard you say last quarter, but then I realized when I went to it today, it had changed since I'd gone to it whenever, a couple of weeks ago. So I guess you scrambled to get it live ahead of the pod.
Absolutely.
I'd like to think.
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't mean to act like we're some part of your marketing strategy, but I couldn't help but
but
notice
you
the
are.
coincidence. But we are.
Yeah. And the website really, I don't know, we sort of gathered this sort of momentum. It was sort of exciting. It was fun to sort of do this. We were rejuvenated, I guess you could say. So we kind of looked at, technology. Obviously, AI is having a huge impact, positive and negative, I would add these days. We were always on sort of the Google Workspace platform, which I think initially was quite siloed. Everything didn't really work together, but it was cheap and it worked, right? I would say they've come a long way. So, I think Google Workspace has really helped us sort of maintain continuity and have the data sort of consistent across the different applications. But I think we're always sort of thinking about how we want to stand out. So I thought if we were, quite aggressive with technology, that would obviously be another way to do that. Chris and I are always sort of early adopters of it in general in a consumer-facing fashion. So we changed our CRM to something called Copper, which is a very lightweight application that integrates seamlessly with Google Workspace. So, I was mentioning how Google has sort of come together with their applications. Copper, sort of brings the whole CRM element into the picture. And then we've implemented sort of workflow automations. We brought in Zapier. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but
Sure.
it's very hard to work with. A lot of Copilot, AI, Python code, but I think we've come a long way with it. So we're sort of auto logging, sort of all our communications. Creating AI summaries, sort of spreading that across all the different apps, which allows us to. It's interesting, sort of filling in the gaps of all our past relationships. So Chris and I had a contact database of over 5,000 contacts. What we decided to do is export that and sort of put it in an archive. So we wanted to really organically grow, from scratch a couple months ago, our entire sort of system and way in which we operate. Because, as two people, I feel like we can now operate as five. Honestly, in terms of it's enhanced our sourcing, it's enhanced our communication, it's enhanced our organization. And, Chris mentioned we traditionally had 35 interns over the 14 years, initially starting, when we started out, we got Salesforce, paid a lot of money, got the private equity edition, and hired 4 interns to start populating the deal flow. I look back at that and where we are today. I think the only hire that we would really look to in the immediate future is probably someone to build some customized code to sort of keep us on. I don't want to say the cutting edge. We're not even close to that, but maybe a little bit ahead of the average on the curve.
And so, to be clear, the way you're using AI and automation is in the organization of contacts and the communication with those contacts.
Oh, it's much broader than that. I mean, every email flows into an automation. So all of that contact information is it creates a bios for all the people that are coming in as an example. It will create summaries of all the firms, right? that are represented by those people. It will tie deals together in some cases, which I think is sort of the next step. We're thinking on further sort of auto enrichment, right, where it's going out to other databases to sort of to further populate. So, I think it's always going to be changing. So it's not like you implement one of these things and you're done. But, I'd say we've probably put 70 to 80 hours of committed time into it. I think we've, made multiples of that back, already. So no, it's exciting. It's fun to have a business and do the same things, but do more of it, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that does feel like the sort of pattern in AI that's emerging. Of course, it will enable net new things, but it seems like the use case for we normies in the world, we professionals, is that it will just amplify what we're able to do. So maybe more of the same and better, but a multiple of what one person's able to accomplish. So,
absolutely,
guys. I want you said something there, Edwin, that triggered one last question. So it's great that you guys said yes to doing this podcast and that it worked well with your marketing, and it was in the course of our pre-calls and what you just said now, Edwin, an evolution for you guys to want to even appear on a podcast. And we encounter that a lot talking to sponsors. And there are plenty who just really are camera shy or podcast shy. They just rather keep quiet about what they're doing. Can you share with the listening sponsors what your calculus was to decide to talk more loudly about yourselves and how you weighed the pros and cons?
Well, Chris convinced me to do it. No, that's not true. I think you're right. It wasn't something that we were seeking. It wasn't something that was immediate. Yes, let's do it. It required a little bit of contemplation, but I guess, as I was mentioning earlier, it's just, trying to, I guess, get the message out to find like minds, right? To to work with, to meet, on the founder level, on the capital partner side of things, and just to share a little bit about our excitement, with what's going on and what the future holds.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Chris?
Sure. I guess two things. One, well done getting Edwin to say like minds. But actually, I think, well, two things, and I'd like to bring back kind of the early intro piece and the internships, mostly because I think it relates just to getting messages out and telling one story the way you guys have provided such a great platform for independent sponsors. And it's fun listening to your podcast and listening to all of your guests from the various seats that they sit in, and seeing so many different ways one can go about this. And when I think of sort of the commonalities that Edwin and I have had over time, and certainly in the time prior to starting Pillsman, it's kind of the entrepreneurial finance angle to the stuff of business. And when I think of internships, my first job in private equity was actually in Madrid in college it was a fund of Banco Santander. So I basically sat in the file room for 9 months, just going through investment memos. And amusingly, some of them those were actually chemical deals. I was a Spanish major, and I would read these chemical deals in Spanish thinking, like, how is this ever going to be relevant to me? Well, sure enough, fast forward, I get to meet Edwin, subsequently in my career. And that was, after spending a couple of years in Chile, again, at a startup asset management firm doing equity research as, the only gringo. At the time, it was a portfolio company of Chase Capital Partners, Hicks Muse, and Blackstone. And it was, an asset management investment of theirs that I was working in. And I didn't actually even know it at the time. But then kind of flipping the lens and then seeing what is sort of entrepreneurial finance, and the fact that I was actually working for a finance entrepreneur there. and then kind of taking it back and connecting all the dots with Edwin has been really fun. And again, along the way, I think having sort of interns and getting people exposed to this business, whether it be private equity or whether it be the just the independent sponsor model, it's been really fun to see people, now a dozen plus years into the future in kind of the careers that they have gone and done in a number of capacities and levels. So it's fun to see.
And Chris, your interns, do they know what independent sponsors are in the world of private equity before they meet you guys? Is that something that everybody has the vocabulary around in school these days?
It's interesting. Probably early on, they didn't know what we were. In the first decade or so, I would assume we'd get it now. It's, the whole entrepreneurial finance and I forget all of the other acronyms for it. Those are all kind of baked into business school curricula now and private equity clubs and things like that. So it's kind of standard fare at this point.
Yeah. Great. Chris Eichmann, Edwin Burke, thank you guys for doing this. Thank you for saying yes. We're so glad you did. Thanks for giving us a little bit of extra time. We covered a lot of ground today. We really appreciate you joining us on the Minds Capital podcast. And if you have deals coming up in the next year or two, we hope you'll share them with us, Minds Capital.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. For more like it, subscribe to the Minds Capital podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch us on YouTube. Also, check out Minds Capital, where Nicholas and I are partners alongside Max Lummis. We invest equity in independent sponsor deals. So if you're a sponsor with a deal under LOI, please visit mindscapital.co to start a conversation. There's also an investor tab on our website with information about future fundraisers. See you in the next episode.